In South Africa's last election, the eligible voter turnout was the lowest it has been in years, 49%, a strong drop from 57 in 2014 to just 49% in 2019. The truth is, we are losing democracy, not only in South Africa, but in other countries as well. The US, Mexico, India, and many more are all struggling with their democracies. Mexico with their government slowly turning authoritarian, and India with their declining civil liberties, just to name a few. Today, we see politicians more focused on serving their own interests rather than the needs of the people they represent. Big money has infiltrated politics, drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. And special interests dictate policy, leaving the majority marginalized and disenfranchised. The 2024 election year will be one of the biggest ever, with over 50 countries holding elections. It's time to pose the question: is democracy working? And if it isn't, is this why there has been a fallout in voters? In this speech, I'll be discussing how and why democracy is failing and what we can do to improve. I'll begin by defining democracy. A simple definition is a system of government in which the power of the state is given to the people or the general population of the state. In theory, this sounds great. I'm able to vote and my voice will be heard for new laws being passed. Unfortunately, democracy is not it's all made up to be. The general population isn't really represented anymore, and this is because of corruption. Legal corruption. Take into account the first part of the election, the private funding or the money primary. It's called the money primary as politicians need private donations to be able to run their campaigns. If they do not have sufficient donations, they can't run. And those who do run were chosen by the donors. According to Lawrence Lessig, candidates spend anywhere from 30 to 70% of their time making phone calls and pulling strings to get those donations. During this time, they also develop a sense for how well or how badly their actions impact their donations. They constantly change and optimize their views to whatever will make them the most money. They call this lean to the green. Now, since this is such a big part in the electoral process, I think it's pretty important to see who those top donors are. In 2020, just 20 families donated as much as $2.3 billion to the US election, which to them collectively is not a large sum of money for having control over politics in your country. This small group of elites dominates the money primary, meaning the rest of the population with an average income have little to no say in the first part of the general election. This has the consequence that this democracy is responsive to these funders only. Today, we see that voters don't choose the politicians. The politicians choose the voters. The economically elite alter our democracies and our countries in more ways than we realize. Take another example of legalized corruption, lobbying. In the US, the majority of the population wants stricter gun laws. Now, this doesn't mean banning all guns and getting rid of all of them. This just means having a higher age requirement to purchase a firearm, or having more in-depth background checks. These little changes would help to solve the gun violence problem that has been plaguing America for decades. Unfortunately, lobbies for the NRA, the National Rifle Association, legally bribe and pay off senators and Congress members to vote or not vote on laws regarding guns. They do this because if any of the laws that I previously mentioned were to be passed, it would have a negative impact on their earnings. And the firearms market, as you guys most likely know, is huge in the States. This is just another point to show how much money truly impacts politics. But enough negative talking. Let's talk about how we can improve and how we can do better. I personally have some great ideas about democracy, and I think that the world would run much smoother and equally on Wiktor democracy. First, I would incentivize the middle class to participate more in the funding aspect of the election. I would do this by creating tax incentives for it. This would make a more equal money primary that's not solely controlled by the economically elite. Second, I would crack down on lobbying and try to exterminate it to the highest extent. I would also create a maximum age limits for candidates. Think about it. How many times do we see older candidates becoming elected that are completely out of touch with the younger generations? It's time we get some younger minds into this political system. This will also incentivize the younger generations to vote more. But it's not only the systems that have to change. It's also us. We have to make democracy work as a society. And in order to do that, we need to vote. But I know what you're thinking. Didn't you just speak about how democracy is flawed and that our votes don't really count? Yes, but that does not mean we shouldn't vote. We should understand the fact that the economically elite control most political systems in the world, but we should not by any means be controlled by it. By not voting, you're doing exactly what they want. You're giving them all the power. We need to vote to hold on to whatever political power we have left and then work on it and develop it until we have true democracy. And change is always possible. Don't believe me? Look at my country of Poland, for example. In Poland, democracy was at a steady decline for 8 years straight. The party in power was doing everything it could to make Poland an authoritarian state. They were changing the constitution, passing absurd laws, you name it, until people got together and voted. Recently, the opposing party got elected, and now we are slowly starting to build back our democratic institutions and getting our country back to normal. Change is possible through voting, but the way we are currently voting is not very optimal. First of all, we're not voting rationally. Take South African elections, for example. Nelson Mandela changed this country completely, no question about that. But his party, the ANC, has been in power for 30 years. And for a country with as much potential as South Africa, more change could have and should have been made. The reason why the ANC is still in power today is because families feel a certain relation and a connection with the party, as it was the party that ended apartheid. In this case, people are voting emotionally instead of rationally. Social media also has a huge impact on voting. Today, we see people becoming more radicalized on both sides of the spectrum, whether that be left-wing or right-wing. This is because of social media. Many social media channels are created solely to cause political unrest and to divide countries' populations. We slowly start to believe this propaganda with the posts that we see and the videos that we watch. And ultimately, this can alter our vote. So please, when you are voting, vote rationally and without the influence of social media. Think for yourself. Solving democracy isn't necessarily the biggest problem we have. It's just the first one we have to solve. In order to tackle bigger issues such as load shedding or climate change, a strong democracy is required. In closing, the grip of money and corruption on politics highlight a crisis in democracy globally. In order to combat this, we need reforms such as having a strong participation in the middle class of the funding, and also curbing lobbying. But individual action is also crucial. By resisting social media's manipulation and voting rationally, we could reclaim our political power and fight pressing issues such as climate change or load shedding. A strong democracy isn't just desirable. It's essential for real progress and for real change. Thank you.